Okay, our career competitor today helps leaders and business professionals understand how deeply their thought habits impact every part of their work and lives. As a certified habit finder coach, our guest has led over 300 female business leaders through 4-month small group engagements called Encounter, designed to replace unhealthy thought habits with healthier ones. Our guest has also published a book earlier this year titled I See You, a guide for women to make more, have more, and be more without more work, which gives you the tools you need to increase your level of success while working fewer hours, a way of working I know that we would all love to live by. I'm excited to discuss all things habits today with our guest, Amy Kemp. Amy, how are we doing?
I'm so great. Thanks for having me, Steve.
Absolutely. And as we were chatting away before we got recorded here, very excited for this one, just to really dive into this notion of all things habits. Because let's face it, we're a show that is encouraging people to discover and pursue their optimal self, to compete at the highest level of what they do. And what better way to do that than to have this pool of habits, hopefully, that you can rely upon and utilize to the best of your ability. So with that being said, Amy, I would love to actually go a little bit back here with you to start off with the genesis and where this whole mission of yours really started to take off. When did you maybe notice for the first time that this world of habits was a world that you not only wanted to be in, but you obviously wanted to, play this leading role within as well?
Of course. So I think it's been about 14 years ago now, I was leading a top team of salespeople and had a friend who was a peer who worked with a coach, and he was a habit finder coach. You know, when you see someone and they kind of have it where you just can feel that there's something shifted, something has happened, and her business was exploding, and she was just, this energy around her was so pure and so magnetic. And so I said, what's happened? Like, what are you doing? And she connected me with this coach. So I worked with the tool that I use now called the Habit Finder. So my work specifically deals with habits of thinking. We often talk about habits in terms of how we schedule our days, or habits in our health, or lots of different habit areas. But this work that I do is specific to the subconscious habits of thinking that are happening underneath the surface all day long that we're unaware of. So when I first took the Habit Finder, I was even a little put off, a little bit irritated. How did you know that from that? It just felt a little irritating to me. But I engaged, and my business grew it probably about doubled in size as I started to identify the subconscious habits of thinking that were really holding me back. And so that was the origin. However, I continued to work in that business for a long time until about 7 years ago, when I don't know if you've ever had this happen, but you start to hear a message that you're supposed to do something and you ignore it because it feels really ridiculous.
Right. Right.
And so every podcast you listen to, every book you read, every lunch you have with a friend, they're saying that same thing to you. And the message was, you're supposed to start working with women outside of the context of the women I was already working with in my other career. And it just felt ridiculous. But I happened to be in Salt Lake City speaking at an event and met with my coach who lives there. And I told him this, and he said, well, we're starting training for new Habit Finder coaches on Monday. This was Thursday. And so without any hint of a long-term strategic plan, talked it over with my husband, who said, I think you should do it, and got certified. And then really kind of accidentally started a business that grew so fast, which is super fun. So I didn't think I was starting a business. I thought I was just scratching an itch and going to do something on the side. And it turned into a really cool business. I'm so grateful for.
Well, I've already found like 5 different things that we have in common, first and foremost, and about 10 different things that I immediately want to go learn more about just through our conversation right here. But something that really jumped out as you were speaking here is this almost the fact that the universe was speaking to you. The universe was having this influence, having this impact. on you. And this is a story, it comes up from time to time. I wouldn't say it's common, but it comes up from time to time within the show. And the reason I'm immediately gravitating towards it is because the very same thing happened to me. But I'm curious, just from your side of things, because I'm sure some people can resonate with that part of it, but then actually taking action on the back end of it, because we talk about that from a competitive step in your world. Clearly, that decision took you to a whole nother level in all aspects of life. So I'm just curious, what gave you that belief or that conviction that not only am I seeing this from the universe, but I'm actually going to take action with it as well?
Well, I think what was keeping me from taking action on it for the time that I was resisting it was that I knew that decision would impact a lot of people and not just me. I knew that if I started to move toward this whisper, this kind of calling to move in a new direction, and I really started to transition, that there were going to be people who were unhappy with that decision because it would impact them. And in a really compassionate perspective, it would take me away from them, right? And I was leading them. And so I knew that decision, I think for any leader, when you make a transitional decision, this decision is not just about me. It's going to impact a ton of people, right? Yeah. I also was performing at such a high level in that other world. And I was leading the number one team in the country, very visible. And so it wasn't going to make logical sense to a lot of people. And I knew I would get a lot of weird feedback about it, right? Sure. And I think that's actually an important part of a transitional process, is that you've got to be able to encounter that feedback and move through it, or you're probably not ready for the next new thing. You've got to be able to process through that, or else you're probably not going to be able to step into the new space and have what it takes. I think you need what the transition has for you to be ready for the next thing. So for me, it was a lot about, what do I say no to that I was afraid of? Where do I stop giving myself away for free when this is worth tens of thousands of dollars, this thing I'm doing for free over here? Or, it just became a real introspective. I had to get real quiet and block out a lot of feedback from external places to be able to really access that inner knowing that this was the direction I was heading. I'm dying to know your story about your moment. Can I ask about it?
You can. It is something we've discussed on the show before, but sure. I actually appreciate you, and I think it's a good time for me to even share it, mainly because it allows me to confirm so much of what you're speaking to here as well. And what I love about your answer here is that you actually were able to find a better question in my question. It's just like, it's not about necessarily coming to the decision. It's about why it took you so long to make the decision. And I love that. I love that, because that is probably an even more relatable question right away. Like, people can relate to that. For me, I come from this world of sports. I was a swim coach, and I was a swim coach for a long time. And then I started this podcast, and I was inundated with people that would come on this podcast and ask me what I did for a living after they would experience the interview. And they couldn't put two and two together. They would just say, I don't understand why you're providing doing these interviews, the way that you do them, and not then taking that very skill set and utilizing it where it can be of best value. And I would always hear the compliment in there. I would also hear the challenge in there too. And
so basically they were challenging you. Why are you not using this and getting paid for it, kind of? Is that
not necessarily the podcasting side of things. It was more about the fact that the way in which
coaching?
the way in which I conduct my interviews is very similar to that of life coach, executive coach, whatever you want to say, however you want to put it. And for me personally, it was just like, okay, I utilized that very same skill set in my swim coaching. But what was funny here, Amy, was like, that was when I started to really notice that I had been zagging in this industry of swim coaching this whole time while most people zig. Like, most people in that industry are very science heavy, very reliant on the kinesiology components, the physiological components that come with performing at that level. I was always zagging over here, built like the relationships that I built with my athletes and the way in which I would communicate with them and make time for them and all this kind of thing. Very similar traits that I'm obviously utilizing now as an executive coach. And so for me, I was thinking of it through a similar lens to yourself, in that think of all these athletes I'm going to have to walk away from. Think of all these relationships that I've built for so long. Think about this career that I've built for myself. I'm actually fairly established now at what I'm doing. And the other part of your point too is think about what how people are going to see this from the outside looking in. And like, my goodness, when you said that, I was like, okay, everybody's relating to that right now. Everybody's relating to that right now, because when it comes to, as you put it, anything transitional, how can we not almost get in our own way because we're trying to see it from the perspective of everybody else, you know? And that, I mean, it's such a powerful insight. If anything, I would love for you to even expand more upon it, because I think specifically as a woman too, because that's a part of this that we have to acknowledge. I think we have to acknowledge it. But as a woman too, or just in general, just that transitional component from the outside looking in, just more on that would be great.
I love it. I've gotten into practicing yoga a lot in the last few years, and there was a class recently where she was talking about transitions and how uncomfortable we are in the space between where we were and where we're going to land, but also the importance of staying in the discomfort of that place and not rushing through it, because that's where we learn our best lessons. That's where the stuff, like, if you want to know everything in you that needs to be healed, you know, either move from a traditional job into entrepreneurship, that will bring it to the surface really quickly, or, you know, go through a major public sort of facing transition, because again, what's coming up there, and what came up for me was the need for approval, wanting people to like me, wanting everyone to understand my decisions. And even just this whole idea of I'm leaving a place where I am revered or celebrated or seen as an expert, right? And on stage and doing, you know, having the microphone in my hand and moving into a space where I don't know what I'm doing. And yet for me, I kind of love that. I mean, I kind of love the newness of learning something. Even publishing this book, I knew nothing about the publishing industry, but I kind of relish the being the student and really committing to learning about that world, and then learning how to move in it, and learning the language of it, and learning how to master it, and meeting people in it. And there's something about that that's really energizing to me. I have no idea what your question was.
There was no question. There was no question, really. It was more just us having a conversation and me asking you to expand a little bit more upon what you'd already said. So there's no question. You're all good.
Okay.
But the fact is, though, that again, there's just, if there was a running checklist of things that we have in common in our stories, I'm just checking off too many boxes now at this point. But what I want to do here is bring it back around to this more niche component of how you actually go through habits, because to actually just determine it, not so much about the action of the habit, more about the thought process of the habit. When did that become when was that something that you had an awareness for, like, hey, this is where I can actually make the difference in what I'm offering, versus maybe what people would commonly assume, you know, anybody that's working in the habit industry would be focusing on?
Yeah. Okay. So the core message of my book and my work is that you can't outwork your thought habits. The people that I work with, and even my ideal reader for the book, I would say, are the people who, they are not lacking in hard work. They have put in the hours and the time, and they are already leading, or they're experts, or they've accomplished something, but they get to a place in their progress where just working harder doesn't move you forward. There are no more hours in the day. And so I'll tell a quick story from the first chapter of the book, and what precipitated some of the shift also was that we had a meeting with our financial advisor, and I don't know if you've had one of these moments. Most people have, where you remember what you were wearing, you remember the temperature of the room, you remember how you felt. But we had filled out all of these forms, and it was like our annual meeting. And so she kind of arranged her little papers in front of her on her desk, and she said, I've reviewed everything. You guys are doing a great job. You're not overspending. You're really, you know where your money is. You've done a great job. There's just one problem. If these are your goals, fill in the blank, pay for college for 3 kids, retire at such and such an age, all of those factors. And then she leaned forward and she said, "You're not making enough money." And I mean, the air left the room. I don't know what happened for the rest of the time because I think that it was a truth I knew. I think I had been working my way to it, but to hear it so starkly, I also knew that my husband, who works in education, wasn't going to make any more money.
Sure.
So I knew the weight of this was on my shoulders. And I knew also that at the ages that our kids were and just our energy and time, I couldn't work any more hours. There was no more time for me to work. And so I was in this sort of a place of, I will not give up on these goals. I will not sacrifice these goals. But in order to move to the new place, I'm going to have to think differently. I'm going to have to really look at some of these underlying assumptions, and maybe one of them being to make more money, you have to work more, right? But these underlying habits of thinking must change. I cannot outwork this. And I can outwork just about anyone, Steve. I mean, I am good at work. Like if you give me a goal with a deadline and you tell me, I mean, I'm on it. I actually love to work. I will find a way, that is my wiring. But all of a sudden I ran into this, I will not sacrifice on this, but work isn't going to get me there anymore. Sure. And that's my reader. She or he is at that place of, something in me has to change. I've got to have a different perspective, a different understanding, a different way of thinking for me to move forward from here.
So powerful to have such a defining moment and say, okay, I've got 2 decisions to make here. One, either the goal changes or my thought process towards the goal changes. And I have to say it from a reality standpoint, the majority of folks go with the first option. The majority of folks go with the first option. It's just like, well, based on the way things are, we're going to have to pull back a little bit in terms of the goal, settle for something a little less so. You and I know what that is doing is it's just feeding into the very problem that you, Amy, are trying to solve now in terms of, hey, I'm just going to keep working. I'm just going to keep working, and I'm going to accept that the result is it cannot be any higher than X. It just cannot be any higher than this because all I have to do is work. How can I do it any other way? And you're saying...
You know what else, Steve? I've never thought this until you're just saying this. You're also robbing yourself when you choose option 1 of the miracle. You're robbing yourself. So, okay. Let's just go back to that moment. If I had opted for that, right? Instead of opting for the I don't know how, but I will figure this out. That was the response I had, right? The how is beyond me, but I will figure this out. Then providence moves. You know that statement, once you're committed, providence moves?
Yep.
Yeah. Then it was 2 months later when I have the conversation in Salt Lake City where he says, by the way, on Monday, we're starting this training, right? But without the commitment, I would have robbed myself of the miracle and then this book never would have been written.
Right.
So it's I wonder how many things the world has lost or how many cures for things or how many solutions to problems or how many accomplishments have been missed for that very, that minute moment in the financial advisor's office where someone chose option 2, right?
I mean,
I've never really thought about it like that.
I love the way you capture it with this notion of robbing ourselves of the miracle. I mean, what a beautiful statement that is, firstly. But secondly, it speaks to this service that folks maybe don't realize they need in their lives, which is simply just having someone in your life to remind you, remember where it is you want to get to. Remember that. Don't lose sight of that. Now, and to be clear, this is not me pitching you on my coaching services or Amy's coaching services or anything like that.
Sure.
This is me literally just saying, who are those people in your lives that you're bold enough to share your most outrageous of goals with. You know, these to the outside looking in, this would be a miracle if you could pull this off. But then for those folks to not only hear it, but turn around and say, listen, there's going to be times, well, probably many times, where you want to pull that goal back and settle for much less. And here I am hearing you talk through this and thinking, you referenced some of these conversations you had with your husband, and then you already had an established coach, and you already had kind of this community that you could probably confide in and say, like, listen, I've just received this information, and I'm sorry, but I'm not changing the goal. So something else has to change. And you have these people already set in your life who can provide you that support that you need to start to exercise whatever it is you need to exercise to bring this to fruition, which happens so much quicker just because you weren't willing to let go of the goal. Like that's the key here. You never let go of the goal. And for me, it's not a coincidence that suddenly these pieces not only presented themselves, but they were things that you could actually, you know, act on as well.
100%. And actually, I wasn't working at a coach, but with a coach at that time. But the first thing I did was to hire one when I knew I was going through that transition, because I knew there was too much coming up for me to process through all the stuff we kind of started with about how do I move from a space where I deeply care and have invested in people to a new space without them feeling hurt or harmed. I did not want to do harm in the transition, right? I knew everyone wouldn't be happy, but I wanted to do it in a very graceful, gracious way. So I knew I had such intensity of feelings that I needed a safe space where I could actually talk through it. And it's funny, I'm finishing my current engagement with my coach. And I'll say to her sometimes, I'm so tired of having this same conversation. You must be so tired, because transitions are circular. It comes up again and again and again, and then I would talk through it again, but it comes up less and less frequently now. Sure. I'm further down the road, so it's less and less. But there's no way I could have made it through the transition without a safe place to process all the feeling that came up along the way. And that's not to say that people can't get through transitions without a coach. I'm just saying, for me, it would not have gone well. So
Sure. Well, your story in itself so far has been enough of a lesson in this episode for people to take a number of nuggets from, which is great. But I definitely want to take advantage of the fact that you're right here in front of me right now, and just pull from some of this insight that you can obviously provide us. So when we talk about some of these habits and these areas that you're working on today with your clients and the work that you do, where on earth do you start with this sort of thing?
I'll give you the cheeky answer, which is to read my book. But
right, that's good. That's okay. That's okay.
Actually, I would say the first thing is awareness. And so there does need to be something that brings awareness. Obviously, you can take the habit finder on my website for free, and it is a snapshot of your habits of thinking. But I do think that the first thing we have to do in making any kind of changes is to grow awareness around them. So the habit finder is basically a tool that allows us to see the grooves of the brain and where the brain is tending to travel most easily right now without thinking, without conscious thought. So it's kind of like a slide that your thoughts go down. When the groove is deeper, they'll just head that way and you're not even aware of it. I'll give you an example of one. One of the habits of thinking that is a risk area for me is to be fantastical. So I will create in my head, this is a gift, by the way, that you can vividly create what it is that you want in the future in your mind before it's actually real, right? Most entrepreneurs can do this also. But I can see, for example, the outcomes that I want to have happen as a result of writing and publishing a book, which is not a bad thing. The bad thing is when you get attached to it and then reality shows up differently, right? Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's all right. It happens.
I've got So this fantastical brain of mine will skip ahead and it wants to miss the work, miss the millimeters. It just wants to get to the end result, and it starts to attach happiness and joy to someday when I get there, someday when I sell this number of books, then I'll be, when I make this amount of money, then I will be, when the business is this size, when I have this number of people on my email list. I mean, fill in the blank, you can do whatever. Okay. The other risk with this habit of thinking of mine is that I will then feel disappointed when reality shows up differently, and even worse, I will say, what's wrong with me? So I'll give you a funny story about this in the book. So it's the first day the book comes out is the first day that you get numbers on how many books have been pre-ordered, right?
Sure.
And for some reason, again, this is a new world for me, so I have no context. I don't know what's good. I don't know what's not good, but I had created a number that I thought I should hit by this day in my head. I don't know how I came up with it. I just landed. And I had been visualizing this number apparently without even knowing it. So I got the numbers, and the actual number was, I would say, maybe 25% of the number I had been visualizing.
Right.
And so I was in the kitchen, and my senior in high school son was like, Mom, how you got the numbers today from the book? How are they? And I said, well, they were not what I expected.
Right.
I was disappointed. And he said, well, isn't it the first day? Right?
That's a wise senior. That's a wise senior. I like that.
And so I was just kind of laughing like, oh my gosh, yes, it's the first day, and just enjoy the millimeters. Mm-hmm. I don't even know why I attached that number to my feeling of joy around it instead of just enjoying the number of books that were sold, which was amazing, right? And so again, we rob ourselves of the joy of the moment because our habits of thinking have us living off in places that aren't here and now. Right. Instead of really visualizing it and having the goal, there's nothing wrong with that, but coming back from it to the tiny millimeter steps and loving the millimeters, loving them, just loving them, or visualizing the millimeters and not just the end result, and attaching our happiness to it. Yeah. But you can see how, let's say I had done this podcast right at that moment of disappointment, I'm going to show up with totally different energy than if the number that I had in my head was under what it actually was. Mm-hmm. Right? And
that I think that's what's crazy about all of this that you're talking about, Amy, is all of these habitual thoughts that are flying around. And I love that metaphor of just the slide that your thoughts are going down. I think that's very relatable. This notion that as these thoughts go flying around each and every day, that they are showing themselves in the real world, in our energy and our mindset and just our attitude towards what it is we're doing. And I think that in itself is enough for anybody listening to this to say, okay, maybe it's time, instead of just allowing my thoughts to kind of run free and hop at the top of this slide every day and go flying on down, maybe there is an awareness that I can at least create. There may be some thoughts that at their best that they are worthy of going down that slide and being left alone. But there's also an argument to be made that maybe some interference, maybe some awareness, maybe some form of interruption could be healthy in order for us just to have that greater perspective, that greater outlook, and more so that greater energy in what we're doing and how we're showing up each and every day. And I'm already a very internal process guy. For someone that talks as much as I do, this thing in between my ears is probably going like 5 times even quicker than my voice is going. And so for me, I always joke with clients is that there's always going to be a third person in the room. There's going to be myself, the client, and then there's going to be this Steve that's kind of floating above the conversation who's trying to kind of operate in this, okay, what is good for the conversation right now? Or am I being present right now? Or am I listening the way I could be listening right now? And, again, I'm not encouraging people to create these imaginary characters, so to speak, but at the same time, just from what you're saying here, this awareness, what it can do to begin with, is it can just allow us to become attentive enough in that what if just simply doing some of this work could allow us to show up more consistent with our energy and with our perspective and with our outlook? I mean, are those some of the things that you start to see from folks
And
you work with?
imagine if I didn't have language for what just happened, I was quickly able to say, my brain went to fantasy, right? It went to fantasy. Then it felt disappointed when reality showed up as less. And then I beat myself up about it. So at least I had language. And when we have language, at least you have agency to choose a different thought, right? But otherwise, it takes me days to recover from that because I've just beat myself up and now I'm feeling bad. And then I've got to show up to my work and I'm not going to have the same level of confidence heading into a meeting with a prospective client or whatever that is, right? And so if I can just say, that's what happened, my habits of thinking caused me to create this thing and then attach my feeling of value or my feeling of happiness to it, then I'm like, okay, well, that's no big deal. Just move on, right? Like I did. I mean, my son's comment helped shake me out of it faster too, right?
Right.
I was able to see what happened. But what I'm saying is if we can get into the observer's chair and see our habits of thinking from a distance where they're over there, they're just thoughts. They're not us. They're just thoughts. And so if we can see that that's what's impacting my feeling around this, then I can move forward and actually just get my hands in the clay that I've been given and actually just get it in there and kind of squish it around and build what I'm supposed to build here instead of living in this fantasy world that doesn't even exist, right? The other way it can go too is catastrophe. So this happens a lot. I tell this story in the book about, the line in the book is, if you're going to make up a story, you might as well make up a good one, right? So I had talked to a prospective client and it went really well. And I thought, this is so cool. I can't wait to work with him. He's a super cool guy. He said, I'll get back with you after the weekend. I just want to talk to my wife. Okay, great. Well, then I got busy and it was probably Tuesday. I hadn't heard from him. And then you start to do did I misread? Was I wrong? Did we really not connect as well as I thought? Does he think my fees are too high? Do I you can make up any story, right? And so I can't remember how it all played out, but an email showed up in the next day or so that basically said, I found this email I had written you in my drafts and it never got sent. And it was basically let's get going, let's move forward. Right now, here's the lesson. How much time of my day did I spend making up stories that weren't even true and didn't serve me and caused me to show up as less than confident in conversations with the next prospective client or the current client or the whatever, fill in the blank, right? Because I was living in this story that wasn't even true. And so if I don't know, maybe he did hate me and he thought I was a weird, pushy salesperson, or maybe the email was in the drafts. Well, if I don't know, I might as well tell myself the better story that's going to serve me, right? Because if you're going to make up a story, you might as well make up a good one.
My gosh, if there's anything you take from this episode, folks, take that. Take that. Just because we are awful at telling ourselves the better story. We are so good at telling us the story that will make us miserable and will bother us and all this kind of stuff. And the hardest thing for me is I'm very naturally empathetic. So for me, I'm always going to assume and try to sort of put myself in people's shoes and feel what they're maybe feeling or think what they're maybe thinking. And that is something that I have worked on so much over the years. And fortunately, my wife is great at just allowing me to talk some stuff through from time to time. She's like, I think you might be overthinking it. And just I'm like, yeah, you're probably right. But that, again, if anybody's hearing this right now, you're like, okay, come on, calling the kettle black. We all do this. We all do this. And so for me, I can't help but want to just learn from you. For anyone listening to this, it's just like, okay, yes, I want to tell myself the better story. But knowing me, if I do that one time, chances are I'm going to fall right back into my old ways of doing it. And while your answer may be, hey, go grab a copy of the book, I'd love for you to also just provide that insight maybe around how can someone maybe get consistent with that very skill?
Don't you think it's a lot like athletics? in the sense of it's like training a muscle to do something differently. So I think you should expect that you're going to return to the old habit for a bit, right? I
Yes.
played basketball in college, but at some point along the way, someone changed my shot form. And I don't remember exactly why, but I did not shoot as well for a while and it felt really awkward for a while. And then I kept going back to the old way and then we would change, like move it back to the other way. And then,
Hmm.
it felt awkward and it felt that's what the process of changing a habit of thinking is. I would start any conversation with someone around habits of thinking by saying, if you're expecting fireworks and overnight results, this is not the work for you.
Hmm.
If you want long term, and actually, I'm not really even interested in overnight change or fireworks. I mean,
Right.
I like fireworks on the 4th of July, but like I'm not interested in the quick fix tip because it
Right.
doesn't last.
Mm-mm.
I'm interested in sustainable long term life change. And this is a slow, boring process. This is not every day feeling like a win. I will say that you will win over the long run. Many of the wins will be in the way you're experiencing your life with more peace and joy and calmness and
Hmm.
just actual groundedness. But this is not for the person who's like, I want an overnight story,
Yeah.
because that's not how it works. It's a very gradual shifting. I also think it's nearly impossible to change a habit of thinking without some sort of relational component, whether that be even with a friend, but where you are accountable to this change. I
Yeah.
just don't see any kind of sustainable life change happening outside of a relationship like that, where someone is actually you're able to come back and continue. Like with my coach, right? We keep
Yeah.
having the same conversation. That's actually how you change.
Yeah. It is.
you know, it's actually it shows up in different iterations and different experiences, but at the core, we keep coming back to some of these very same habits of thinking.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I mean, fortunately, you're on a show with an audience that no one subscribes to this show for overnight success. Yeah, people subscribe to this show because they understand that it's a process, and if there's any teeny tiny competitive advantage that they can insert into that process, then they're here for it, and they've gotten that in abundance here on this episode. But the one thing I would love to ask you before I let you go, knowing that you were an athlete as well to the collegiate level, you're an entrepreneur, you built your own business, all these things, I have to assume that there's a competitor in there somewhere. Amy, I would love for you to just describe to us, when I say a word like competitor, how does that resonate and relate to Amy Kemp?
oh my gosh. Well, first, my husband and I had to stop playing Monopoly when we were just married, or we were not going to make it. We were because we are both, and then we have these really intense kids, and we're always like, they're so intense, and then
Wonder why
we,
that is. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I know. I have the same kids. I have the same kids. And my wife and I are like, how did this happen? I don't get it. It's like, we might, maybe because they're their mom and dad. I don't know.
oh my gosh, like we have friends, and like their kids will play with something for 4 hours. They'll build Legos. Our kids were like throwing them at each other, and
Yeah.
we just
Yeah.
we do the intensities. To me, I would say I've evolved. I used to want to beat other people. That's how I would have framed competition. I really would say I love the process of getting better because I'm competing with someone. So I play a lot of pickleball now. I wouldn't
Nice.
say I'm great, but I love it because I'm getting better at the game because someone else is competing with me, right? Our matching of things is strengthening me and teaching me things. And I kind of think about that even just in terms of business, also, right? There was a time where I was vying for number one in the nation with someone else, right? And I'll never forget the night when we found out who was number one because I like called her at midnight after the year end, and it was sort of like a weird, you tell me what you did, and because
Yeah.
we were just wanting to know who won
Yeah.
basically. But both of us were so elevated through the competition. Our team rallied in ways that it never would have. People felt such a part of that because of the element of competition. So I don't necessarily think someone has to lose for it to be beneficial, I guess, is where I've come to. I feel like the active competition evolves and like elevates everyone's performance.
I love that. I love that. And, this notion of just simply committing to a process, understanding that in that process, there's going to be times where we're competing against one other, many others, whatever it may be, but to appreciate how you're getting better in that process and not allowing these results around you to maybe over influence, your perspective towards that competition.
Yep.
Amazing insight. Amy, this is one of those episodes where I'm so glad that I don't prepare any questions for my guests, because we would never, had I prepared questions, there's so much I would not have learned from you today, as our listeners would not have learned from either. So I'm so appreciative of just the generosity of insight, the generosity of time. But before I let you go, you are a published author, and any published author that comes on this show has the ability to share with us where we can get the book from, and obviously anything and everything else that you think we need to know about yourself, so we can start following all your work as well.
Of course. Thank you for the opportunity and for being such a gracious guide as well. It was so fun to be with you today. People can find me at amykemp.com, easiest way. It's my name. And you can order the book there. Of course, you can get it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all of the places where great books are sold. I also recorded the Audible in my own voice. So if you listen and you're a listener, that's a great place for you to receive. The other invitation, I love people to follow me on Instagram at Amy Kemp Inc. So that is a fun place. Same with Facebook. Those are my two main social media platforms that I engage with. And then if you are curious around habits of thinking, there's no harm in taking the Habit Finder for free. It's on my website, Amy Kemp. It just says Habit Finder Assessment. You can click on it and you get the results right away. So if this is something that's resonating with you, this idea of, there might be something happening at a subconscious level that's actually creating drag and resistance to me moving forward, and I could clear it out so that I can just create what I was put on this earth to create, man, I'm all in for that. That makes me like get up in the morning and be excited about the day ahead. So,
no doubt. And I will probably do that very habit finder myself at some point this week, because my mind, I'm already making all these assumptions about myself. It's going to tell me this, going to tell me this, going to tell me. So I would love to see how much of that is confirmed and how much I can learn about myself. But Amy, again, I appreciate the time. The book is already a success, so I don't need to wish you any more luck with the book, but continued luck with anything and everything you got going on in your world. And thanks again for the time today.
Thanks so much, Steve.